flying at 60 feet at night over the water, something I wouldn't like to try on this aircraft, even on a nice day, despite all the aids we have. I think the reason they were successful with it is that they trained as a crew, the 7 people, with one person flying the aircraft, one person looking at the lights to check the height above the water, and one person checking the heading, and the other people checking out, looking out for any enemy fighters, etc. So the whole 7 of them, all working together as a crew to deliver the weapon on the target, was quite a phenomenal achievement, I think.
If we were tasked with that mission today, I think we'd have as many problems presented to us as the crews did to conduct in the attack in the Second World War. We'd obviously need a specialised weapon to attack the target, and we certainly couldn't use a weapon of the size and probably not the weight that they carried on the Lancaster on the day. As to getting the weapon to the target, despite all our modern electronic equipment, we'd probably have just as many problems getting the bomb exactly on the impact point in order to break the dam. So I think we'd need an awful lot of training, much along the lines that they did. Was asked to do it again today and managed to achieve a hit, then you'd still consider it to be a remarkable achievement.
As early as 1937, the British Air Staff was studying the feasibility of attacking the highly industrialised area of the Ruhr, which was identified as being vital to the German war machine.
Mr. Wallis did put forward a theory that was hoped.
It was estimated that 3,000 sorties would be required to destroy the principal industrial targets in this zone, with a projected cost of 176 bombers. The Air Targets Subcommittee then put forward another plan. Agreeing with Air Ministry officials that neutralization of 45 defended targets would prove difficult, it proposed as an alternative just 2 targets, the Mohne and Sorpe dams. Disruption of the Ruhr industry would be the inevitable consequence of the dam's destruction. Millions of cubic meters of water would be released, flooding the area and causing severe shortages for hydroelectric power stations, steel production and other industrial processes. Bomber Command replied by drawing attention to the solidity of these structures, against which all existing bombs would be inadequate. At the optimum point for bomb detonation, a gravity wall dam would be about 40 feet thick. At this time, the heaviest bomb in the RAF arsenal was 500 pounds. It became clear that the RAF did not have the capability to execute an attack of this sort. In addition to inadequate bombs, inaccurate navigation techniques and equipment were also causing problems. In 1941, the Air Ministry's Butt report concluded that only 1 in 10 bombers were getting within 5 miles of their target.
In 1941, the Air Ministry's Butt report concluded that only
Despite Bomber Command's shortcomings, German dams figured prominently in the minds of some British planners.
Despite Bomber Command's shortcomings, the Ruhr industry figured prominently in the minds of British planners. Meanwhile,
All right, Collins, go ahead.
Tests were carried out to try to determine exactly how much explosive would be required to breach these enormous structures. Quite independently of the Air Ministry, an aeronautical engineer called Wallis was examining the possibility of destroying natural sources of power. Already established as an aircraft designer, he was primarily concerned with structures.
The unique or unusual structure of the Wellington, applying Barnes-Wallis's geodetic principle, supplied the Wellington with a great deal of strength for a given weight of material. The aircraft could also sustain considerable damage in action when geodetics might be shot through. These members here could be cut. In fact, here is a repair joint, and the aircraft could return safely back to base. Many pilots and aircrew who visit us today at the museum say they owe their lives to the fact that they were in the good old rugged Wellington.
For the first 3 years of the war, the Wellington had been the RAF's main bomber. In designing this, Wallis had studied the bombs it would have to carry and was only too aware of their impotency. Between autumn 1939 and autumn 1940, he studied every aspect of bomb design and the chemistry and physics of high explosives. After painstaking research, he came up with a rough design of a 22,000-pound bomb.
The bomb itself was dropped from high altitude, hit the ground at twice the speed of sound or near enough, penetrated to about 100 feet in the ground.
Wallace's detailed study had revealed conclusively that the maximum damage was not caused by the expansion of gases by an exploding bomb, but by the maximum damage in the surrounding ground. By the expansion of gases by an exploding bomb, but by the shock wave created in the surrounding ground. If the bomb could penetrate the Earth, the explosive force would effectively be locked underground, causing a mini earthquake.
Barnes Wallis considered further developments of the Wellington bomber to carry these new heavy bombs of his, and he looked at many designs of 4-engined and 6-engine bombers like this aircraft, which was called the Victory Bomber, which would have in fact carried his 10-ton Grand Slam bomb. It would almost certainly have been built in the same manner as the Wellington, with this unusual geodetic interlaced structure.
Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, though keen on the 10-ton bomb proposal, pointed out that Wallis's big machine required to deliver it could not be designed, tested and built without serious interference with existing aircraft production. The introduction of a new bomber type had hitherto taken up to 6 years. In the current war situation, this was plainly unacceptable. After a year's deliberation, the air staff rejected the twin concepts of Big Bomb and Victory Bomber. Meanwhile, the model dam experiments continued in earnest. The results of tests were still discouraging. The best achieved predicted that 15,000 pounds of explosives detonated 100 feet from the face of the dam could cause severe damage, but not structural failure. Simultaneously, Wallis was investigating other methods of achieving more accurate weapon delivery, which would allow an explosive charge to be smaller and perhaps negate the need for a new, bigger aeroplane.
I think that it was this use of a rather unusual theoretical structure that gave Barnes Wallis a degree of credibility for some of his future rather unusual ideas, such as the development of the spinning, bouncing, dam-busting bomb. There were many other inventors at the time during the war who had all sorts of funny ideas for helping the country to defeat the enemy. I think Barnes Wallis had gained a fair amount of credibility as a result of his success on his Wellington bomber.
Wallis recounted in a later interview that he had the idea in early 1942 of a missile which, if dropped on the water, would reach the dam by a series of ricochets, and after reaching the crest of the dam, would explode in close proximity to it. He commenced experiments in his back garden in Surrey in April 1942.
Watch it, Christopher. 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Fire, that's good.
I first started in my own garden using a family wash tub and firing little balls that size out of the catapult, and found that they would jump off the surface of the water.
Then Wallis moved to the ship testing tank at the William Froud Laboratory at Teddington.
You all ready? Once again. Right. 3, 2, 1.
A breakthrough occurred when Wallis decided to backspin the projectile.
With the idea of spinning the bomb, ultimately, after tests by spinning it backwards, increased the range of the bomb, giving him more latitude in dropping it on the target.
The backspinning had another effect that pleased Wallis greatly. The rotating motion caused the projectile to hug the wall as it sank. Based on these results, the mine would explode in contact with the wall, having been automatically triggered to detonate at a depth of 30
Now
feet.
we switch to one of the big testing tanks. Watch it.
Collins, the head of the team of testers at Hammondsworth, decided to try a contact explosion on the model dam. It was completely blown apart. For the first time, it was realized that the dam could be breached with a reasonable amount of explosive, providing the bomb could be made to explode in contact with the concrete. It was calculated that just a 7,500-pound charge would do it. Even with the casing, this was just within the lifting capabilities of Bomber Command's latest aircraft, the Lancaster. The next stage was to test the spinning projectile idea by dropping it from the air. A Wellington was converted for this task, and tests were conducted in September 1942 on Chesil Beach in Dorset. Early tests were discouraging. The casing of the spherical test projectile shattered on impact with the water. Undeterred, the experiment gathered pace. By January 43, real progress was being made. Wooden mock-up spheres were bouncing 20 times over a range of 1,300 yards, considerably farther than predicted. The two versions of Wallis's secret weapon were given code names. Highball, the smaller version for possible use against German ships, and Upkeep, the larger version, destined for operation against German dams. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris was briefed, and his response was scathing.
Will you come in, please?
He wrote in a communique to Air Vice Marshal Saundby that it was an idea of the wildest description, and there was not the smallest chance of it working.
Wallis, good morning. What is it you want? I've got an idea for
He
destroying the
concluded
Ruhr
that the war
dams.
would be over
The effects
before
on
it
Germany.
worked.
That goes for all these wheezy ideas. When you try to make them work, they fall down
Harris
flat.
would take some
This one
convincing.
doesn't. How do you know?
Other officials, however, were much more enthusiastic. The modification of 3 Lancasters was ordered. There was now some urgency. The optimum time to attack the dams was when the German reservoirs were full. This occurred in May. Time was marching on, and Upkeep was still only on the drawing board.
I was on a small team which Barnes Wallis formed to do the design and operational drawings of the actual bomb itself, of Upkeep itself. Initially, the Upkeep was covered with wooden slats to make a ball shape of it, 80 inches in diameter, because Barnes Wallis's work until then with very small scale models up to the half-scale model which was dropped from a Wellington were all spherical, and he felt that this was the right way to go about it. The wooden slats were bolted on to this steel surface so that they formed a curve up over here, and this is 48 inches diameter, but the sphere at its maximum diameter would have been 80 inches. When the first one of these were dropped in test from a Lancaster, the force of hitting the water split the wood off, and there was no way that we could find in the time available of holding the wood in position. And the film that was taken of that particular flight shows the bomb hitting the water and the wood flying off in bits, and then this steel piece carrying on bouncing as Barnes Wallis had intended the spherical thing to do at any rate. So that gave him the encouragement to forget the ball-shaped bomb and actually use this cylindrical shape as the weapon which was actually dropped on the dams.
Another setback was then encountered. The bare cylinder repeatedly shattered and sank. It was concluded that unless the height of the attacking aircraft was reduced, the operation would fail.
And what we have here is unique footage of Vickers test pilots and 617 Squadron testing the bomb known as Upkeep that was to breach the dams in the famous Dambusters raid. Here we can see some of the earlier tests of Upkeep in its final form. They're dropping it here from about 150 feet, and you can see this is really too high, and it doesn't bounce at all.
In Lincolnshire. Initially called Squadron X, it was to be commanded by Wing Commander Guy Gibson. Holder of the Distinguished Service Order and the Distinguished Flying Cross, he was still only 24 years of age. By the morning of March the 27th, all flying and non-flying personnel had reported to Scampton. In total, nearly 700 men, and none had an inkling as to what Squadron X had been formed to do. Their secrecy would remain until the very last moment. 2 days later, specific orders arrived, and X was replaced with a number, 617. Orders read, number 617 Squadron will be required to attack a number of lightly defended targets. These attacks will necessitate low-level navigation over enemy territory in moonlight. On March the 16th, Gibson took a Lancaster over Derwent Reservoir near Sheffield to test his ability to fly at the required height. In daylight, despite problems posed by the surrounding hills and some industrial haze, this proved comparatively easy. When he tried at dusk, however, he nearly crashed. It was clear that intensive training would need to commence immediately.
Gibson said, all I know at this stage is that it will be done with Lancasters, flying at low level, in moonlight, and training will also include formation flying. We had done 1 or 2 low-level flights, but not in close formation. Close formation in a Lancaster is rather a different operation and wanted a lot of practice.
American synthetic night flying equipment was installed. This consisted of blue celluloid filters attached to the windscreen and side windows, while aircrew wore amber-tinted goggles.
It seemed very, very low indeed, 150 feet. And then he ordered missions of 3. That, I think, was probably the most primitive of the training we had, because we had to guess the height, and we couldn't really get accurate readings on any altimeter that was available in those days. And that was a big problem that had to be overcome.
You had trees, you had high tension wires, you had all kinds of obstacles, even some balloons. And at that altitude, you can't really be sloppy in flying, because if you drop the wing at 60 feet, it would be on the ground.
Originally, the weapon was intended to be dropped at 150 feet, but because there were accuracy problems with that, they decided to go lower to 60 feet. And here, in this sequence, you can see some of the problems when that happens, as pieces of aircraft are pulled off by the spray thrown up by the bomb.
There still remained the difficulty of maintaining 60 feet over water at night. Several abortive attempts to solve this problem were made, one involving trailing a cable of specified length from the aircraft. The Director of Scientific Research at the Ministry of Aircraft Production, Benjamin Lochspeiser, came up with the answer. In 1942, Coastal Command had briefly attempted to use spotlights to assist depth-charging submarines. Lochspeiser remembered this. Coastal Command, who were using the system over choppy water, never managed to perfect the technique. The water surface of the reservoir, though, would be smooth. Spotlights were fitted, and the beams arranged to form a figure of 8 on the water, just forward of the starboard wing. This would allow the navigator to direct the pilot by looking through the blister on the starboard side of the cockpit. If upkeep was to make close contact with the dam, its point of release was also critical.
It was very important to drop this bomb at the right distance in front of the dam. To do that, the bomb aimer had a very simple device, such as we have a mock-up here, where he put the eyepiece to his eye and lined up the 2 prongs with the twin towers of the dams. And when they lined up, which was just a simple triangulation, he would release the bomb.
Perhaps this is illustrative of some of the enormous difficulties there were in putting this weapon down accurately. As this aircraft, as a way to avoid the splash its weapon from very low height, you can see the enormous force sharply is needed to propel it along. Was probably dropped a little bit too far from the aiming point, and doesn't quite make it to the beach. A little bit short, and doesn't anybody who remembers Michael Redgrave's performance in the feature film with Dambusters will recognise Barnes Wallis's gestures here as the amused onlookers try and encourage it to reach the target.
We didn't practice with upkeep at all until the very end, and all we had was one run with a dummy upkeep. The day before or 2 days before, we still didn't know what it was for. The target was completely secret. We only heard the secret on the day that we took off for the raid. That was when we knew what the target was to be.
The whole film is unique, but we also have the great good fortune to see here, a few days before the raid, Guy Gibson's very own aircraft flying past very closely to the camera. And as she does so, we can just make out behind the RAF roundel the letter G, which was his personal registration.
The 20 modified Lancasters arrived at Scampton in dribs and drabs during April, the last being delivered the day before the attack. The mid-upper turret had been removed to reduce drag and weight. The bomb bay doors fared in, and 2 V-shaped brackets were installed to support the barrel-like bombs. A belt linked this to a hydraulic motor positioned in the fuselage.
A few days before the raid.
A few days before the raid, the special bombs arrived from the filling factory. The final version of the upkeep mine comprised of a cylinder approximately 60 inches long by 50 in diameter. It weighed 9,250 pounds and contained 6,600 pounds of Torpex underwater explosive.
In these 3 holes here, there were hydrostatic fuses, which hydrostatic pistols were the proper name for them, which were set to the depth that Wallis had decided was right and proper, which was in fact where the bottom of the dam wall and the ground level intersected. And when the mine had sunk to that depth, the hydrostatic pistols would fire and the bomb would blow up, cracking the concrete of the dam and allowing the weight of water to do the rest.
The whole attack procedure would be a team effort. The pilot would be responsible for the line,
while the remaining two guns
the navigator for the height,
with tracer.
the flight engineer for the aircraft's speed, the
On
bomb
the
aimer for the raid, while the remaining two gunners would strafe the defences with tracer. On Sunday, May the 16th, 1943, speculation on the target ceased as aircrew were given a detailed briefing. At different times during the day, bomb aimers and gunners joined pilots and navigators to study models of the Mohne and Sorpe dams and photographs and maps of the other routes. Thereafter, discussions and briefings became virtually continuous for over 5 hours. The Met Men's forecast was favourable. The raid was definitely on.
Gentlemen, it will be 14:26.
The 19 Lancasters were to take off in 3 waves. Wave 1, consisting of 9 aircraft, would take off in groups of 3, separated by 10-minute intervals. Their targets were the Mohne, Eden and Sorpe. Wave 2, 5 Lancasters, would attack the Sorpe independently, while the remaining 5 would act as an airborne reserve, taking off 2.5 hours after the other waves. With the nature of the task ahead now sinking in, there was pre-raid tension in the air. Sergeant Garshevitz chalked on his aircraft's bomb, "Never has so much been expected of so few." The note of defiance had particular poignancy as Garshevitz was one of those who did not return. At 21:28, the green Aldis lamp signaled the time had come. Operation Chastise was underway.
Settings for takeoff would be maximum at +12, which you can see on these boost gauges in front of me. We've got the tail up, we're rolling, we keep her steady on her course by adjusting the throttle slightly until we've got flying speed, slightly eased back, the aircraft is now airborne, hold her level to pick up her full flying speed, and then we climb over the fence, just.
They encountered stronger winds than anticipated. Not only did they reach the enemy coast late, but in the wrong place. Crossing the heavily defended Walcheren Island, the Lancasters hastily adjusted course. Flying at such low altitude, complete accuracy of navigation was proving impossible. the aircraft drifted off track several times during the flight. To add to their problems, there were concentrations of flak that had not been predicted. Gibson was forced to break radio silence when a pocket of 12 searchlights east of Dulman was encountered. The second trio, commanded by Squadron Leader Young, experienced similar problems to the previous flight, though all 6 arrived at the target relatively unscathed. The third flight of 3 aircraft, however, were less lucky. Flight Lieutenant Astle flew into flak and crashed in flames. All 7 crew members were killed, the extremely low altitude making an aircraft abandonment virtually impossible. As this was happening, Gibson, Martin and Hopgood circled target A, the Mohne Dam. Holding back 132 million cubic meters of water, the structure looked impregnable. As indicated by the briefing, there were no searchlights or balloons, but the flak batteries of up to 12-20 million guns were firing frantically. The flak guns on the dam sluice towers would be able to shoot almost horizontally at the approaching attackers.
230, steady, 235, steady, 240,
The bomb spinning underneath. The vibration in the aircraft was quite alarming, really, at low level until one got the feel of it again. Which came fairly quickly, but one is concentrating so much on what one's doing that other feelings seem to vanish from the mind.
The bomb bounced 3 times and after some 10 seconds exploded, producing a tremendous spout of water. This subsided, revealing the dam still intact. The second in was Hopgood. This time the flak gunners were not surprised. The other Lancaster crews saw his aircraft hit several times. Both engines on the port wing were damaged. In all the confusion, the upkeep mine was released late. It bounced over the crest and landed in the vicinity of the power station. Hopgood struggled to 500 feet before the Lancaster exploded.
And 2 people, we learnt afterwards, got out of that airplane, which was aflame from stem to stern, and the whole thing broke up in the air. And how they ever got blown because their parachutes opened is an unknown to this day. But one felt, you know, fairly rocky then, and then we watched the others go on.
Exactly 10 minutes after Gibson's attack, Martin began his run. This time, Gibson flew slightly ahead of him to distract the gunners. In spite of this brave precaution, Martin's aircraft was damaged. The mine sheared off to the left, and once more the disappointing code word for explosion but no breach, Donner, was transmitted. The engineer in charge of the Mohne power station, Clemens Kohler, was warned of an air raid. Realizing the devastation that could occur if the dam was whole, he telephoned his superiors. His insistence that a serious threat existed was brushed aside, and no warning given to the inhabitants of the valley. Next, Young came in over the spit to the exposed stretch of water in front of the dam. This time, Gibson's gunners engaged enemy fire on the far side of the wall, while Young's mine made 3 good bounces, sank and exploded in contact with the wall. A vast column of water rose and crashed over the crest into the compensating basin.
Eventually it slowly cracked from one side to the other, and collapse from the middle outwards really and explode, because it was the weight of water behind the explosion which forced the huge dam walls to collapse. One saw the water absolutely going down the valley from there and taking everything before it, because it became a huge mass of water going down from one side of the valley to the other. And it was a most, I suppose, a rather an eerie feeling to begin with, even though we had achieved the first target and broken the walls.
Remote from the unfolding scene below, the Lancaster crew observed without comprehending its full significance.
When we left the Mohne Dam and headed off the Ede Dam, the mist that forms everywhere over Europe at that time of year was starting to cover the valleys. Anyway, we were running down on what we thought was the Ede Dam, and we found out that it wasn't, and Gibson called up, "Where are you, David, where are you?" And I said, "Well, I think we're lost for the moment." And he said, "Well, just lift up a bit and I'll fire a very pistol and you'll be able to see it and get your bearings."
The straggling aircraft found the target. The Ede Dam nested at the foot of a steep hill at the far end of a narrow, winding reservoir. Though undefended, the rugged terrain made achieving the attack requirements an extremely daunting proposition.
We would be gliding down onto the water level, and when we'd have to throttle forward, right forward there, and at the same time the engineer would be giving you full boost from that side there. And we had about 600, 700 yards to get up to a speed of 225 miles an hour, and we had to have reached that speed 450 yards back from the dam wall which was in front of us.
Shannon made 3 attempts without releasing the weapon. It was proving impossible to achieve the correct height after clearing the spit in front of the dam. No mine had been dropped, and time was ebbing away. Maudsley was sent in to try on his 3rd attempt. His mine was released too late. It struck the parapet with great velocity and exploded.
Gibson called up, "Are you all right, Henry? Are you all right?" And a faint answer came back, which we could hear. He just said, "I think so, I think so." But in the event, of course, he crashed on his way back. And that crew were completely lost. Nobody got out of that at all. I think he must have hit and flown into another obstacle of some sort, probably a hill or high-tension cables. And so I was then called back to make my run again.
After 2 more dummy runs, the conditions were right.
And I was doing my steep climb again to get over the hill on the other side, when my rear gunner shouted out. He said, "I think you've done damage, I think you've done damage."
Shannon had weakened the structure. Knight attempted an approach run 15 degrees left of Shannon's line. The bomb bounced 3 times and hit the wall slightly right of centre.
He hit it almost square on, and we saw the whole bloody wall fall out there. And there was tremendous elation from that time on that although we'd had some losses going in and losses over the dam, at least we had broken completely 2 of the targets that we were given.
The work of the first wave was complete. Below, the disaster was unfolding. The crews of the second wave were briefed to attack the Sorpe Dam. This was of a completely different design to the gravity wall construction of the Mohne and Ede. It had a sloping face of far shallower incline. Dropped normally, Wallis's bomb would roll over it and explode harmlessly on the other side. Instead, crews were instructed to fly along the length of the dam and, without spinning the bomb, release it as close to the middle as possible. En route for the Sorpe, 2 Lancasters were forced to return to Scampton, and a further 2 were shot down. This left 1 Lancaster flown by Flight Lieutenant McCarthy. The pilot reported a very hot reception on crossing the coastline. Fortunately, the German night fighters were still patrolling 1,000 feet too high to spot the bomber. Again, navigation difficulties made worse by the ever-thickening mist hampered the operation. To attack the dam along its length, the aircraft would have to avoid a church steeple which lay on the flight path. 10 attempts were made before the bomb aimer was satisfied with the line and altitude and released the weapon. There was visible damage to the crest of the dam, but no breach. The Sorpe posed all the same problems for Brown as it had for McCarthy before him. He finally resorted to dropping flares to mark the route through the mist.
And I got on the wrong side of it, the back side of it, way down here. And of course, by the time I realized I was on the back side over the powerhouse, there was a very large hill in front of me. And coming up that slope, my airspeed was dropping off like you wouldn't believe. And of course, just as I started shuddering, I realized I was going to go in unless I made a stall turn.
On the 6th attempt, the mine was dropped, causing more damage to the crest, but still no breach. Some experts have argued that upkeep was a completely inappropriate weapon for the Sorpe, and that this dam should have been left out of Operation Chastised. Without the clinging effect caused by the mine's rotation, precise delivery was not possible. Wallis's other invention, the deep penetration bomb Tall Boy, was used on the dam the following year, though again, no breach was achieved. This and the bigger version Grand Slam were used very effectively, however, in the closing stages of the war.
On March 19, the viaduct at Arnsberg was attacked by Lancasters of Bomber Command, using 6 22,000-pound bombs. This viaduct was one of the 3 main ways of escape out of the Ruhr left to the Germans.
The Bielefeld Viaduct, the Tirpitz, and Hitler's V-2 sites were all very successfully attacked. The last aircraft engaged in Operation Chastise attacked the Ennepe Dam. The mine exploded short with no apparent effect. Dawn was imminent. After waiting in vain for the others to arrive and complete the task, Townsend turned for home. The Chastise Lancasters tore a gap 76 meters wide by 22 deep. Within 12 hours, 116 million cubic meters of water had escaped in a tidal wave 10 meters high. The catalogue of destruction in the Mohne and Ruhr valleys was extensive. In all, 11 factories were totally destroyed and 114 damaged. 2,822 hectares of arable land were rendered useless. 25 road and railway bridges were destroyed and 21 damaged. Numerous pumping stations, water and gas supply facilities were destroyed too. Such is the tragedy of war. The human price was also high. The final official figures for the Mohne were 1,294 casualties, 92 houses destroyed, and 971 damaged. to the closely knit group of service and civilian personnel, their loss seems no less significant.
Wallis was just beyond himself. He was elated for a moment, I am told, at the time of the bursting of the dams. But when he started to find out about the discovery of the losses, he began to cry. He didn't expect to have that sort of loss. Losing so many young men, fine young men.
Wallis was affected very deeply by the losses incurred on the raids on the dams, and he was shattered when he realized that the vast number of those brave crews that set out didn't return. This affected him quite a lot for the rest of his working life. He always approached the job in a manner where he probably would not kill anybody or any pilots. For an example, his work after the war on experimental aircraft, visionary aircraft if you like, he had queues of test pilots ready to fly his aeroplanes, but he preferred to do this work by unmanned flying so that he didn't risk the lives of these chaps. He went as far on one of them of designing a man-carrying Wild Goose visionary aircraft, but halfway through this, when it was half built, he had it cancelled and went ahead with radio-controlled instead. We're in the control room of Barnes-Wallis's stratosphere chamber, which he built soon after the war as part of his new research and development department, housed in the old clubhouse at Brooklands. His ideals were for high-altitude supersonic flight over long ranges, for which he adopted the swing-wing design. As you see here is Barnes-Wallis's Swallow with the wings swept back as it would be for supersonic flight, and they would be swept forward about a pivot here for subsonic flight, takeoff and landing. It is this principle, of course, which is used in the famous Tornado aircraft, some of which are flown by 617 Squadron of the Royal Air Force today.
The Germans' rapid recovery after the raid fueled criticism that the operation was of limited military value. The breached dams, for example, were fully repaired by the early autumn of 1943. This conclusion, however, ignores the much wider ramifications. Were forced to divert valuable equipment and labor to effect repairs. 10,000 troops and complex defense measures were taken just to protect German dams.
In Britain, the credibility
Wallis had gained led to rapid development of his big bomb theory. In addition, the operations value in the propaganda war cannot be underestimated. Striking post-raid reconnaissance photographs, for example, were widely distributed in the Allied media and in leaflet drops over enemy territory. The resulting positive effect on Allied morale was substantial. For all these reasons, it must be concluded that Operation Chastise was a significant contribution to the Allies' victory in Europe.